Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Essential Libertarians, giving you the tools for self-governance. I'm your host, Kareem Mays, and I have the next governor of Pennsylvania, Matt Hackenburger. He is not only an amazing libertarian, he's a veteran, he's an advocate for gun rights, and the only one on the ballot actually doing that. And I'm super excited that he is here today.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
Thank you for taking the time. Definitely, I'm excited because there's a lot of people out there that I see that are either going to say vote red or vote blue. And then when I really ask them the question, they just say, oh, well, because one side's not the other side. And I think we can do better than that. And specifically, I was watching Tim Pool and Mastriano was on there, and they said, why don't you actually debate Matt Hackenburger? And he hasn't taken you up on that. So we're going to bring you on here and we're going to blast all the questions that are important out here. So easy question is, would you consider designating the ATF and other alphabet agencies terrorist organizations in Pennsylvania if you were elected?
Absolutely. I mean, they're foreign actors. They've come into our state and they're acting aggressively against people of Pennsylvania. They deserve to be disposed of. They deserve to be stopped and imprisoned and handled appropriately.
Excellent. And the big question is, I usually go for the tough questions because I know a lot of people are just like, oh, okay, gun rights, but should felons have guns?
Fucking right. Absolutely, they should. I think there's a number of people who are convicted felons and they're not a danger to anyone. And why should they be deprived the right of life themselves and deprived the right to defend themselves? You have like a 100-pound female who may has like a drug possession conviction or some other felony conviction. Why should she be deprived the right to be able to defend herself? She should just accept it, that she should be easily overpowered and raped and murdered as any man walking by sees fit. That's ridiculous. If someone is too dangerous to own a firearm, if they're a dangerous felon, then they probably should be removed from society in some other way. They should still probably be in prison. The prison should be to reform people. And if they're out of prison and they're reformed, then they should be allowed to have their firearms. Easy as that.
Yeah, I really like that. And I'll even add to that, like, even if they're out and they're dangerous people out there, we know now, yes, the government is one of them. And there's people who are just crazy, but they will not go through legal means to get a firearm. Imagine that. Every criminal story I've ever read about has gotten it illegally. And that's what I want to let people know, that, hey, yes, felons can have guns because not only are they going to be responsible after they've done their time, if they're not going to go through legal channels to get it. And people don't really think about that. They don't take the time to think about that critically. So I think that's important. Now, the subject came up in the chat, and recently the elites in the government and all these medical practitioners, I'll put that in quotes, want amnesty. What do you think of that?
Like I've stressed many times, I say no quarter, right? You've committed a crime against humanity, you've been complicit in a crime against humanity, then there's no excuse for it. People knew from the very beginning that they were wrong about the mask mandates, about the isolation, about the vaccine mandates. People are calling this out from the very beginning. This is very clear. There's no excuse for these mistakes. They're peddling propaganda, supporting the pharmaceutical companies or whoever else, other special interests. They're blindly supporting it, and they should be handled appropriately. They are criminals. They committed a crime against humanity, and they should face repercussions for their actions. Simple as that.
Yeah, and they violated the MAP, which I think is the most important thing to us as libertarians. If you're using aggressive means, whether you're doing it yourself or you're using designations through the medical industry or through police or whatever it is, then yeah, I don't think there's any reason to forgive someone who's aggressed on you, trespassed against you, stolen your money, made you put masks on your kids or yourself, kicked you out of your own business at some point, which it's interesting to see that they did a wealth transfer, the biggest wealth transfer ever. People gloss over that. I think one way of really sticking it to them is not just to put them in jail, but to actually get rid of the institutions, or should I say decentralize the institutions that they use to do this.
Absolutely.
In your opinion, in Pennsylvania, what are some of the institutions we could either decentralize or completely get rid of to prevent something like this happening ever again, where the government comes in or medical practitioners go crazy and say, hey, we can determine your rights and we can determine what you're going to do?
Well, I think is in Pennsylvania, as with most states, and when it comes to medicine, the medical field specifically, is the licensure. You have the executive branch of the government handles, basically, in effect, holds supreme control over the licensure of medical professionals, I mean, nurses, doctors, and everything in between. And that is easily abused, easily manipulated, to whatever ends and it seems fit. And there's no oversight. There's very little oversight. There's no recourse. So if you're a medical doctor or a nurse, and you have your entire life invested into this career, the slightest threat to your licensure, you're going to go along and toe the line. It takes a very, very special person, a very, very special case to say, I go fuck yourself, and I'm going to risk everything to stand for what I believe is right. And we could probably count the number of people who do that on one hand. We see everyone else just put their head in the dirt, and they just kept going along because they need to pay their bills, and they didn't want to be bothered to risk it. So that they had that licensure in place, it needs to be heavily reformed. Licensure, frankly, licensure shouldn't exist. It should be up to employers to determine whether or not someone is qualified for the job that they want to hire them for. Otherwise, licensure should be handled at the county or local levels. If there is licensure at all, the state should go fuck right off.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. One thing I will ask, though, is I'm kind of curious. So the governor, to me, doesn't have the right to declare emergency powers and shut down your business, for the simple fact that if I don't have the right to do something, then it doesn't make sense for me to magically say, oh, well, I can give that right to someone else. Even if me and my friends agree with that, even if a group of us agree with that, which is democracy, essentially, right. Even if I give it to a quote unquote, politician or a state senator or a federal senator, to me, if you own your business, even if there's a deadly pandemic or even if there's something going on, it should be ultimately your decision to shut down or not. So when it comes to emergency powers, because I think this is a big one, and who knows, maybe people really take notice of that. Do you think the governor should be allowed to declare it? Yes or no? And then if they are not, do you think there should be anything else in place of that, or we just get rid of that?
I think at the very most, the governor should have the power to give suggestions, maybe. Even then, I think limited. I think, as far as I'm concerned, when I'm governor, the governor will be more to want to defend the people of Pennsylvania against out of control federal government. So be to counter the narratives of the federal government, be counter the mandates of the federal government. Never to restrict the rights and the freedoms of individuals within the state. That's absurd. It's ludicrous. This idea that we wake up in the morning, you turn on the TV to find out if you're essential or not, and whether you can go to work or not, blows my mind. That just flies in the face of all basic economics. That no man can ever determine what is or is not an essential service. It's just basic stuff. So yeah, forget all that. I don't think that the governor or any man, elected or otherwise, should have that kind of power.
Yeah. I honestly would love to see you just get in there and say, there's no more emergency powers. I'm relinquishing my power, which would be bigger than anything else. Because what's interesting to me is a lot of people make the argument, okay, Democrats use emergency powers, Republicans sometimes don't, but no one's ever relinquished that. No one's ever actually taken the ring and thrown it into Mount Doom, so to speak. You could be one of the first people to actually do that, which would be amazing. And also cutting the state legislature, a part-time legislature, I think is a good idea. And even cutting it in half, because I don't think we need as many representatives as we claim to have. And I say that because a lot of them don't necessarily represent people. They do get sucked in with the lobbyists. And even Democrats and Republicans admit that. So you talked about fighting against the federal government, which is the exciting part to me of why you're really here. You said you designate the ATF a terrorist organization. What do you think about NATO? Should we, or what do you think about these overseas wars as governor? Is there anything you would do to try and mitigate, especially now? We found out there's boots on the ground in Ukraine, just casually.
Yeah.
And a Fox article. What do you think we can do?
Pennsylvania National Guard, Army National Guard, is currently mobilizing, I think, something like 500 infantrymen. Apparently, be deployed to operate in the Middle East somewhere. I don't know what else is the state of other deployments currently in Pennsylvania, but if I were governor, I'd immediately recall all Pennsylvania forces from federal service. So bring them all home. Doesn't matter if they're overseas in deployment or they're currently in mobilization training somewhere in federal service. They're all going to be withdrawn from federal service, and the order is going to be to return home immediately. I think it's ludicrous. This is I think it's Article 1, Section 8 of the United States Constitution. It gives the sole power to declare war to the United States legislature. If they've declared war, it should be illegal. As it is, it should be illegal for the governor to be sending our boys and girls to fight and die overseas. And I mean, I'm a big supporter of Defend the Guard, but even without that, I think that should be implicit in the United States Constitution. And as governor, I would immediately enact that change and would bring everyone home, bring all Pennsylvania boys and girls home.
Yeah, I think we absolutely need to do that. And that's coming from your background, which is amazing because you're a veteran and you can actually see the impact of just sending people haphazardly around the world. To me, it never ends well. And even I think there should be measures taken and say, hey, we're not going to have adventures overseas. We're actually going to fix stuff here. One thing I think we can fix here, and one thing I think that's actually would be fairly easy, and I'm going to say not easy in terms of it wouldn't take a lot of effort, but that gas is super high. I'm sure with your bus and, going around paying a ridiculous amount of gas, everybody complains about that. Heck, maybe we can even get you elected with this one question if enough people see that. Do you think, God bless California, they said we're not going to follow the immigration laws of the feds. Texas says we're not going to follow their gun laws. Same with Alaska. You think it might be nice for Pennsylvania to say, hey, we have oil reserves here. Hey, feds, we're not following your environmental laws. I'm not worried about Greta Thunberg. I'm not worried about what some so-called green environmentalist thinks or these global think tanks. I think we should go for our own oil reserves. And that would drastically bring down the price of gas, which in turn brings down the price of food and everything else. Do you think government?
I think it's beyond the fuel costs at this point, and I don't think people fully appreciate this. We're on the cusp of a major decline in human civilization that it's going to be hard to pull out of, and we need cheap energy to maintain our standard of living. Right? They're wealthy people living up on high. They think they can have their solar and their wind, and they can feel all high and mighty in that. But without these evil, dirty energies, cheap energies, we can't maintain human civilization the way we are. We are going to rapidly decline and descend back into the dark ages, and in a serious way. The technological progress that we've had would all be lost within a generation or two, and I don't think enough people appreciate this and realize that we are running the risk of the peak of the Roman Empire. They had all this technological progress, and then it was suddenly lost. It was gone for ages, and still things today we haven't figured out. And we're at the cusp of doing that again and returning to that. This is period of radical decentralization, which should be good, and things are going to fix itself on its own. But without cheap energy, people are going to die, and including the United States. Right now, I'm looking at like $5.70 a gallon for heating oil to heat my home. I don't fuck me. Pardon my language, but it's insane. It's going to cost me $1,200 to fill my heating oil tank. And that's not going to last me all winter. I tell my wife and kids, well, guess what? You're going to get some wool socks this winter because we're not going to be able to run the heat this winter. And we, with Joe Biden's policies, with these crazy leftist Greta Thunberg policies of, or make it so that the average person isn't going to be able to afford fuel to heat their homes, to get to work. And it's going to cause massive destruction, massive death. And that's not going to help the environment, right? This is actually going to be much worse for the environment. The best thing to do for the environment is we want to get as much cheap energy out as possible. We actually want to grow the human population as much as possible. We want to get as much people out as possible that have a highest standard of living as possible. That way we can get technologically advanced as quickly as possible and get onto better things and get away from these needs for these fossil fuels. When we eventually get off of this rock onto other rocks and expand and so forth. And the only way to do this is through cheap energy and rapid growth of the human population. So all these Malthusian fucks who think that we need to restrict the size of the human population and we need to reduce our energy consumption, resource consumption, they are midwits. They are a huge problem. They are a cancer and they are a parasite. And that these people need to be stopped at any cost.
I will ask you about that, but I'm just going to stay on this for 1 second because I think it's critically important. Because I even thought to myself, I can get past, I can grow my own food. Okay, they're messed with the food supply. Okay, hyperinflation. Well, I have a MetaMask. I got crypto. I'll buy some gold. I'll figure it out. It wouldn't even be good, but we'll figure it out. But I'm like, energy. Like, I could buy a solar generator, but that's only going to last so long. And Europe's even in a worse spot because of the Nord Stream pipeline now. What are they going to do come winter? They're not going to have anything. Even here, we're struggling. So, yeah, the two biggest things for me, especially with energy, are fossil fuels and nuclear energy. And a lot of people don't know that nuclear energy is safe. And yes, people can have wind and solar, and the elites can do that if they want. I'm not against free market capitalism. If you say, I just want to power my home with wind turbines, go for it. I don't think it's good energy personally, but go for it. But you actually understand that it's critical for not only American civilization, but for civilization in general, that we need to use cheap energy. And that does come in the form of fossil fuels. And that does come in the form of nuclear.
And as far as, so going into more detail on that. So wind and solar are quaint. They're cute little novelties, but they're expensive. They're impractical. They're not real solutions. They're toys. They're toys for the rich. I have solar myself. It's great. I love it. It's stupid expensive. It's not a real solution. We have fossil fuels. Fossil fuels are a real solution. The only thing is nuclear power, and nuclear power is the only long-term solution. And I'm not talking about any of this like high-tech fusion, future sci-fi bullshit. I'm just talking about fission. We have fission technologies that work today. We have fission technologies which are just mere engineering problems away from being being modular, being expandable, to being much safer than we have the issues we have today with nuclear power, not having the waste issues we have today. And we have enough energy on this planet as it is in the soil, just from uranium and thorium, to last us to the heat death of the universe, at least to the death of the sun. So the fact that we need any other energy source other than nuclear, safe fission nuclear energy, is ludicrous, and that's the only real answer. Anyone talking about anything else is just blowing farts into the wind, and a waste of time. So yeah, nuclear, like solar or fossil fuels for now to get us through these winters and get us just powering ahead, and then our main goal needs to be nuclear power, 110%.
Yeah, I'm an advocate of nuclear power. I'm an advocate of fossil fuels. And if you even want to go a dimension further into futuristic stuff, maybe Tesla coils or understanding Nikola Tesla's technology. So yeah, I think energy is going to be a big one so people can actually survive this winter. Just forget about, try 100 different things. Just survive this winter. Make sure you have enough food. Make sure that you're able to heat your home. And I think it's important. It's critical, actually. We get libertarians out there because a lot of libertarians understand this. Not a lot of libertarians, give me 1 second. A lot of libertarians understand this, and a lot of libertarians will actually work to, in my opinion, do what Republicans won't do, which is actually create a real free market for energy. That way we can actually use our own reserves and get through the winter. And not only that, but make gas cheaper, make food cheaper, and make human civilization better.
Right.
Now, you talked about stopping a lot of these deep state actors. And a lot of these deep state actors are only empowered by the deep state because there's a state. And I'd say, hey, the best thing for the environment is to stop listening to environmentalists. The best way to stop the deep state is to limit the power of the state. So when you become governor, what policies specifically have you thought of or would you like to implement to limit federal jurisdiction and actions in Pennsylvania?
So, I mean, the biggest thing is just this general idea of nullification, nullifying federal action. So the federal government is limited in size, and its ability depends heavily on local and state law enforcement and government actors to be able to do its bidding. As governor, I would ban a lot of that cooperation, specifically ban cooperation. especially things like the ATF, most cooperation with the FBI, DOJ. They can refer us if they think there's any issues we need to be aware of. But as far as I'm concerned, the federal government can be treated like a foreign government, and maybe an adversary, or maybe just a peer, but not our friend. We're not going to be cooperating with them in any way. In fact, I will specifically bar any cooperation with them. So, and I think that's a critical thing to do. And then two, we have our own little microcosm issues at the state level. Harrisburg is a bloated, corrupt mess on its own. We have people who are just lifelong politicians and lifelong bureaucrats, and that too needs to be resolved. That needs to be, as an executive, that needs to be quickly purged and wiped out. The people there who are there currently existing there are not our friends. They are there for their own political ends, the political ends of their friends, of their compatriots, and they'll immediately be fired. They'll immediately all be removed from their positions, and they'll replaced with my friends from the LPPA. We'll take over, and we'll run the state properly, and we'll start our own little deep state and get things going properly.
I want to be part of the MC Deep State Caucus. Or what are you planning to take over and leave you alone? Kind of like what Edward Snowden said. He said, I don't understand why people are afraid of libertarians. They just want to take over and leave us alone. It's being afraid of cats. I do, though. I see them as, I'm sure they see us as a threat to their hegemony, specifically the two-party hegemony. That's why I'm getting you and your voice out, and Eric Gerhardt, everybody who's doing what you're doing, because at least we're consistent. One day we're not saying, hey, I'm pro fracking, and then I don't like the fracking. Unlike a candidate I can think of. So we're actually consistent. So in addition to reducing the size of government, I'm going to throw a curveball at you. I haven't been there. I plan on going there, but I've seen a lot of work being done in New Hampshire with the Free State Project. PorkFest is there, and I understand there's different people, different thoughts there. There's some right-wing libertarians left, some hippie types, some more conservative types. What do you think about, you don't have to have it exactly the same. What do you think about having a Free State Project in Pennsylvania, or implementing something to that level that New Hampshire is doing?
Yeah, I know there's been some talk and discussion doing that at the county level. I mean, it's worthwhile. We have, I think the greatest thing at any level, any scale, is building community, starting with family and growing out. And I recommend anyone who's never been to PorkFest to check it out. I mean, honestly, if you haven't gone, you are wrong. You need to go to PorkFest. It's a great time, and you will see that it's a beautiful example of what community is and what it can be. And I love to see something like that in Pennsylvania. We already have, within the state party, we already have great community, great people. And my wife and I were actually originally, before joining the LPPA, we were seriously looking into moving to New Hampshire, until we joined the LPPA and met the community here, and well, this is actually pretty damn good what we have here. So it would definitely be good to get something started, maybe on more of a county level, to get people together and get rallied together around one, smaller county that can be more easily taken control of and leveraged, and build a movement. It wouldn't take that much. Even if we just started on a town level, we can act a lot of power and enact some change. And really, like I said, it's the biggest thing is this community. You have a community of people who work well together, get along together, have similar shared values and shared principles. You've gotten yourself 90% of the way there to finding liberty, and it doesn't matter what the feds or the state government or anyone else says. You are, most of the way there, and that's what needs to be done.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why, we're also planning some local takeovers with the LPPA here and in the county, because as far as I'm concerned, I really thought about it. I always used to think, okay, the president and senators, but really, hey, if you get people in local office, they can nullify the feds, and that's a lot easier than going to the feds and trying to nullify them there, as Michael Heiss would say.
Yeah, I mean, really, your state and local government, or your local government, your municipal government, their elections and their operations are far more important to the average person than what the federal government is doing. federal government is irrelevant really to most people. Most people spend way too much time fretting over what the federal government's doing, and really they should be focusing on what their town is doing, because you can just a small amount of effort getting involved in your town level government, you can act a huge change. And I highly recommend it to everyone and anyone.
Yeah. I remember people would complain about CRT and they would complain about different things going on in their town and in their state. But then they would always come down to say, hey, look at the 2020 election. And I say, fine, you can look at there and see if there was an issue or not. But here's the thing. CRT, all these issues are really coming from your school board. They're coming from your city council. They're coming from your state house ultimately. And that's where you have to look to fix things. Whether or not the president is this person or that person doesn't have that much bearing. Nothing in your life actually needs the president's permission. But to own chickens, well, I have to go through city council. And that's a pretty big thing if the supply chain is having issues. With that being said, let me move on to the other question I really kind of jump into is, even though people don't think about it a lot, there's still a lot of people sitting in jail right now over the drug war. And a lot of younger people too, who had futures and now they just don't. And a lot of people, when I'll talk to them, even conservatives, and I'll say, hey, I think it's important that we end the drug war, not because I think these substances are good, even though psychedelics can have some good, effects. But not that I think all these substances are good, but I think if someone has a problem, it should be treated as a medical issue, not a criminal issue. So where do you stand on kind of having if you want to call it like a Portugal thing, where we end the drug war and maybe find some way to facilitate people or help them who have an actual problem?
Yeah, I mean, I support full decriminalization of all drugs. I think it's ludicrous that someone who has an addiction, that they should be handled by men with guns and thrown in cages. That blows my mind. That's not helpful. Addiction is a terrible thing, and it's a symptom of a greater problem. I think going back to, we're talking about before, community and family. A lot of people who are struggle with addiction is because they lack that sense of community, and they lack that sense of family. They feel isolated, and it is a symptom that lets them ease their pain. And it's not necessarily the healthiest way of doing that, but throwing them in a cage isn't going to fix that problem. You're never going to be able to convince someone to stop being an addict until they're ready to stop being an addict. And giving them legal problems is not going to make them feel more part of community, and not going to make them feel more willing to get over their addictions. And it's been shown to be the case time and time and time and time again. So, and then furthermore, I mean, you look at the opioid epidemic. I mean, I'll argue in favor of legalized heroin all day long, because that's the hardest one to argue for. But I think it's perfectly easy to make a case for. So we see right now we have fentanyl. Fentanyl is a huge problem. And where did fentanyl come about? Well, back I think around 2010 or so, the DEA started cracking down on pill mills, because your average soccer moms were getting high on their oxycodones or popping pills and having a grand old time. And the thing about oxycodones and these pills is they're very, very safe. I mean, they're addiction potential as long as you're not mixing them with other pills like benzodiazepines and muscle relaxers, things like that. They have a very, very low lethality rate, and they're very, very safe. I mean, you can say, oh yeah, we don't want soccer moms addicted to pills, but okay, all right, yeah, sure, we don't want that, but they weren't dying. They weren't dying from it. But so we cracked down on pill mills, so we forced them out of it. And a lot of people needed these medications, not necessarily for pain, but also for as antipsychotic, anti-anxiety drugs. Which, little known fact is that opiates are very, very strong, very, very powerful mental health drugs, and they really help people who are struggling with depression, anxiety. And some people take them to self-medicate, and you take that away from them, that's a huge problem. They either go through physical withdrawal or psychological withdrawal. There's a lot of cases of suicide as a result of people who are forced off of them, who are not ready for that. But instead, what you see also is that they get pushed into the black market. So now they can't get their industrially produced oxycodone, so they go to the black market and they get their heroin. And heroin is produced from the opium poppy. It's a fairly simple chemical procedure to take morphine from opium and convert it to heroin and whatever. But this is limited by the cultivation of a plant of a poppy, opium poppy, just done in Mexico, or not Mexico, wasn't done in, well, probably done in Mexico too, but famously done in Afghanistan, which is like, I almost wonder if that was what the CIA was doing there. But I digress. And then, of course, that's limits production. Well, come along these labs in China and then in Mexico, where they can synthesize fentanyl, and fentanyl is completely synthetic. It's made just purely from lab grade reagents, just mixed together in a laboratory somewhere. No need to grow anything. It's cheap, easy to make. It's far more potent than heroin. So you can have some Chinese labs, and one of many Chinese commercial Chinese labs produce a kilogram of this stuff, put it in a DHL envelope, ship it to the United States, and maybe it's like 1,000 times stronger than heroin. So you have 1 kilogram of fentanyl, and something gives some guy in his bathtub, cuts it 1,000 to 1, sells it as heroin, and then voila, he makes a huge money. And it's win. But this is all, at the end of the day, this is all a result of the black market, and this is all a result of market forces. And this is all be solved by just allowing there to be like commercial industrial manufacture of safe opioids like oxycodone. Wouldn't need to do any of this. Wouldn't need to result in these stronger, more powerful drugs. This is no different than what happened during the alcohol prohibition, when people started producing like higher and higher proof alcohols, and you start having contamination with methanol, which would cause blindness and death, and just a result of clandestine manufacture. And again, yeah, sure, you don't want soccer moms being addicted to oxycodones, but you don't want them to be dead either. I'd rather be popping pills than being dead. So I think it's in far as just harm reduction, I think legalizing heroin, legalizing oxycodones would be the ideal solution. And we can go back to where we were in the 2000s and letting Purdue Pharma make a ton of money instead of having a bunch of dead corpses everywhere.
Yeah, so actually even Big Pharma should look at this and say, hey, this is a potential way to, and you could be like Ron Paul, just like, hey, if this was legal, would any of you do it? And I love that moment. And nobody's like, yeah, because none of you actually would do it. So let's treat it as a medical issue. I think it's also interesting that a lot of this is coming out of a Chinese lab. As governor just let people know, if the past 2 years have taught us anything, don't trust anything that comes out of a Chinese lab, or really at this point any lab, because everything's getting more and more crazy by the day.
Yeah. I mean, who knows if the coronavirus is out of a Chinese lab or out of a U.S. lab or some other lab.
Yeah, who knows? But right now,
it was out of bat soup, I think. That whatever.
Yeah, that's the official story. But who actually knows? What's really going on? Because I keep seeing like different things developing with that. With that being said, though, there's a couple other things I'm kind of curious about, and I think other people might be too. The DMV is one. Sometimes we overlook that because now the price of driving is so high, but still, even to drive, you need to get a license, you need to renew this, you need to go through tons and tons and tons of red tape, in my opinion, just to get a car registration, all that fun stuff, and then sign your name 100 times. What's your opinion on, should we keep the DMV at all, turn it into a notary service, just call it a day and decentralize it, or something else?
But what about the roads? I mean, that's a difficult question. I mean, obviously, I think the state should have minimal involvement in there. How it actually be implemented in a private market, I don't know. I'm sure Bob Murphy has probably written quite a bit about this. But I think right now the system we have now is just a big mix, or a big corrupt mix of crap. We have to go to like private title services or private inspection stations, which really has nothing more to do with anything other than just handouts, really, to these private service providers. I don't understand why you need to. Well, at least in my county, I need my vehicle inspected every month, or not every month. I'm sorry, every year, which I think is ludicrous. And why? I mean, I think I'm not necessarily opposed to the idea of registration or licensing fees. I mean, I'd rather roads be funded through usage fees. So I could see that being like a potentially private the way a private provider would monetize them. Man, I don't know. Um, I think that there's a lot of issues going on with the how the pulling blank on it. I don't know, the motor vehicle emission. Yeah, I'm pulling blank on it right now, but how funny it works with the highways and the state. It's all a big twisted mess, and it's really the state should be involved with as little as possible. Implementation details, I can't really give you, but yeah,
Okay.
it should be.
No, hey, that works enough for me. Also, in the interest of businesses got really hit over the past 2 years, they're still struggling. I thought of ways if I was governor, although you're going to be, so that's exciting. I could help them. And one thing I really thought of is, do you need a business license to operate a business, or do you just need an idea and the ability to work it out? What do you think about that?
I don't think you should need a permission slip to do anything. I mean, what is a license or a permit other than just legalized extortion? That's really all it is. It's just like a protection racket, but with a pretty little bow and shiny shoes.
Essentially, yeah. And to me, liquor licenses are the same. I know people say, oh, that's to prevent drinking of people, who are under a certain age. And I say, well, no, that's so the state can make a little bit of money. Do I need a license really to, as much as I used to drink it back in the day, put Pepsi in a glass and then mix it with Captain and Coke and then stir it around? I don't think that takes a license. Granted, yeah, it takes some effort to be a good bartender, but I don't think it takes a license.
No, it's all a protection racket. You think it was like the mob. This is how the mob would operate, and somehow we've been so indoctrinated to think that the government's different. It's not like the mob, even though it's actually the exact same way the mob would operate. And it is. It's literally a violent criminal organization, and they function just like that, and just as you would expect.
Yeah. Well, I'll give the mob one credit. The mob actually tells you, hey, we're the mob. The state likes to make these like goofy rituals and, okay, well, I swore in a Bible now. And no, I'm not a criminal. I'm not a gangster. I'm your elected representative.
I have a pretty suit, nice tie, and look at my shoes. They're expensive. They were $1,000 for these shoes.
And they don't come to your property and say, hey, you got to pay your dues like Luca Brasi in The Godfather.
Right.
They say, oh, you have to fill out a form.
Right.
Now, for me, it's a little bit ridiculous to say I own property, or anyone owns property, really, if you think about it, because we're always paying an extortion fee. But we call that property tax, and we say, oh, it's supposed to help fund the schools and help fund X or Y or whatever it is. And to me, that's ridiculous. In a free society, if you are actually free, and this is one thing that even when I was 13 or 14, people got mad. They're like, why are you questioning property tax? Because I don't own anything, because I have to pay an extortion fee. I say, well, you have a job, you can pay it. Well, eventually, if I get older and I can't afford my home, the kids are gone, and there's nobody to help me, I've seen people lose their homes. I've been on the bus with older folks that have, and that enrages me. So my question to you is, I know definitely you say, yes, we get rid of property tax. What happens when someone says, oh, but how would we fund the schools, or what should we do, or give them an answer like, what would we do with that property tax money if we collect money at all?
Well, in case anyone doesn't know, anyone who doesn't have a property tax bill, the overwhelming majority of your property taxes are for the schools, like huge majority, like 3/4 of it, if not more. Um, and it's, frankly, ideally, I don't think there should be any public funding of education. I think it's like crazy. Like, of all the things that we need day to day, why education? Why is it publicly funded? It's like, do you not think parents care enough about educating their children? Like, do you not think that like that's not the number one priority in your average parent's mind? I mean, yeah, sure, there's some deadbeat parents, but I don't think the state's involvement is going to help with that at all. I think education would be better. Let parents handle it on their own. And I think without having this parasite of the state feeding off of us, it would be very affordable to do so. We have, there's examples all around the world, very, very poor countries that operate completely private school systems, highly effectively, just completely private. Your average, impoverished farmers able to send their kids off to these private schools. and with greater outcomes than we can in the United States. So why do we have this public school system, which is enormously expensive? It just costs more and more money every year, and we have kids who can barely flip hamburgers after 13 years of indoctrination. And I think it's best to not. Well, hold on. Speaking of the devil, this is my daughter here. She's I don't know if you can see her, but she's we are just not going to take her in public school system because why? I think it's sit back. Is why do it? All right, and really, it's the purpose of the public education system is one of indoctrination. That's why it's there. It's not to educate our kids. It's not to make productive a future. Here, let's watch some videos or something, why don't we? It's not to have like a successful future, productive future. It's to indoctrinate kids to be good little plebs on the plantation. And just one moment. And that's what it's there. So I think we should recognize that. A lot of people who are not libertarians may not realize that or not fully appreciate that. So you still need to kind of give them lip service to, you need school choice, which as a stepping stone, I think school choice is a good way to go. I think it's a good transition to a system where where all education is private and self-funded. But in the interim, I think that's all right. But long term, I much prefer all state involvement, all local government involvement out of education.
Absolutely. Because it does two things, in my opinion. It makes it hard on older people who don't even have kids in the school system. And then the state extorts, and then they say, oh, here's a free service. For one, they're lying. It's not a free service. People are paying for it. There's no such thing as free. There's no free lunch in economics. Even if you pull up an economics book and read it for 10 seconds, no free lunch. Okay, cool. Before you get Austrian or Keynesian or anything, you can figure that out. So the money's coming from somewhere.
It's not just that; it's also a trash service, a horrible service. It's like it creates this incentive for parents to basically check out of their children's upbringing, raising their kids. So you have parents who are now like disengaged or not involved in raising their children, which is like literally there's nothing else in this earth, on this planet that you're here to do, right? I don't care whatever your job or career is. Nothing is more important than raising your children. And if you're checking out from your kid's upbringing, you're outsourcing it to some government employee, then you're doing life wrong. Like you're just doing life wrong. And I think people need to realize that and recognize that, and that if you ever have an opportunity to spend any time with homeschool kids, I highly recommend it. I mean, just normal like secular homeschooling kids. It'll blow your mind. You'll find that I had an opportunity to hang out with some family. I think I had like a 16-year-old daughter who was homeschooled a number of years ago, and it was like she could have been 35. The level of conversations they will have with her, very professional, very mature, very adult like. And it makes you realize how immature and how poorly socialized your average kids are that come out of a public school system. They don't interact with adults at all. They don't know how to function. They don't know how to operate. They all act like goofy children at the age of 18, and they don't know their ass from the hole in the ground. And you see homeschool kids as complete opposite. You see mature professionals at a shockingly young age. And you look at it through human history, you see what age people are considered adults, and they go on to doing adult things that long before that we consider it adults. And today, even in our society, you consider 18-year-olds to be dumb kids. And it's like, why is that? Well, that's because our education system is trash, and we basically have a brain damaged nursery that we keep them locked in for 13 years of our lives, and we get the results you'd expect.
Yeah, definitely. We're getting the results of what the state also expects as well, which is the problem, because they're saying at this level or this age, you should have this outcome. What happens if you exceed that? And that to me is what homeschooling actually does. And if you really look at human history, it seems to me public school is the experiment, not homeschooling. Homeschooling works. And even if people say, oh, well, Kareem, I'm busy. Oh, well, Matt, I'm busy. There's Ron Paul homeschool. There's Udemy. Even though I don't agree with everything he says, Elon Musk said, hey, if you really want to learn something, and I've done this myself, you can sit on YouTube, you can figure it out. There are resources now that weren't available years ago that you can actually just about learn anything. Like, I didn't get a degree in podcasting. I just got a Blue Yeti mic, and you got a mic, and hey, we're here. We're figuring it out.
Easy peasy.
I think it can be done. Yeah, I Googled it or Odyssey it or whatever you would like to use.
Yeah, I mean, it's last night I went to an event at ESU, and I talked to some of the college students there, and of course most students I talked to are quite intelligent, but it's this idea that we have, oh well, you need to go to school and you need to sit in a room and have someone talk at you for so many years of your life to be able to learn any skill. And it's like, even onto the university level, and it's like, but why? But why is that? Like, it doesn't make any sense. Like, once you're in your career, once you start working in your career, like, I what I do professionally, I went to school for, but I mean, I would say like 95% of my knowledge came from my what I self-taught while working, and that's really how most people are. Most people are. You learn very little. Is that so? Most of you learn very little from actual school, right? You learn in university and graduate schools. You learn very little. Most of what you learn from while doing, and that needs to be the focus of any education system. And the education system today is not. It's not really meant.
And even with college, which was private, I went there. I learned stuff. It was specifically in database stuff. I said, "Oh, I know Microsoft Access." And they said, no, we're using SQL and Oracle now. And they were laughing. And I'm like, oh, okay. So even the knowledge you might have from a private college or even a private institution, you have to go into the workforce and do it. Also, Alan Watts is an interesting concept that as long as you're not doing something that's super haphazard, like, climbing towers or cutting down trees, even your kids can watch what you're doing and say, hey, what are you doing? How are you doing this? And then spend time with you. My dad took me when he was teaching in college, and I learned a bunch of stuff on the side. Why? Because I actually had that experience. So there's different ways to do it. You can take them with you to work. You can actually take them, sit them down with Ron Paul Homeschool. There's resources available. There's stuff available out there now that you don't have to be beholden to the state. The state doesn't need to have a monopoly on education. And I'll get into couple more topics. One's a dicey one. I don't think they need to have a monopoly necessarily on security because that hasn't gone so well. And one issue that I do see, and one issue that remains to be a problem, is that they have a monopoly on security, potentially the cops. And this isn't to say all cops are good or bad, but the issue is that if you have one group that says I have a monopoly on law enforcement, then it turns out that even if they overreact, that's a problem. Now, if there's competition, I see that isn't perfect, but it significantly goes down. I don't know a lot. I'm not going to say there's none, but I don't read a lot of stories about mall cops knocking everybody out. I just don't see it. Why? Because there's competition to me.
So and there's liability for their actions. I mean, that's a huge part of it too.
Yeah.
So malls don't want their customers being banged up.
No, but and private institutions don't. Why? You'll leave a bad review. I can go on Yelp and say I was harassed by the security guard. So what do you think we can do, especially in Pennsylvania, to make law enforcement either have competition and things like qualified immunity, stuff like that, to make it more socially cooperable with the general public?
Well, I think it needs to be understood, though, is like the big difference between a mall cop and a police officer is who they serve, right? The mall cop serves the store owner. It serves the public, if you will. I mean, it makes sure that, your shopping experience is a good one. And whereas the police officer, they are serving the politician. They're serving the state. They're making sure that the will of the state is being upheld. And as far as that goes, like many times, your wishes and your best interests are at odds with that of the state. So, I mean, they are, but the people who carry the whip and the gun for the state and for the people who own this, own the state, if you will, or the politicians, they are the muscle. They don't work for us. They're not there to serve and protect us, regardless of what it might say on the side of their car. They're there to serve and protect politicians in the state as a whole. And as long as that's the case, that's going to be, doesn't matter what games you play with qualified immunity or anything else. It's always going to be, not in your interest and in the state's interest. So, until you remove that power from the state, that the state can use a force against you, you're going to have to contend with that. And then when it comes to security, because like the thing about police, that their duty is not to provide security, right? They actually have no obligation to do that. They're not liable if they can watch you get raped and murdered in the street, and they're not liable for that. That's not their problem.
The Supreme Court said that even. It's not coming from me. And just to let people know, it's not coming from me and Matt. I know they're going to say, oh, you have an ANCAP flag, you're a libertarian, Mises Caucus. The Supreme Court decided that cops are not there to protect you. They're there to uphold existing laws. Well,
Right.
I didn't write. Well, the problem with that is I didn't write these laws. I didn't consent to them, but I have to pay taxes to the people who are enforcing them. So one, you're taking away my money for something that I didn't agree to. And two, I actually do want real security in a community, even if it's relatively safe. I think everybody does. So how do we achieve that? Do we have competing defense agencies? Do we do it more like a militia style? What do you think is a good way to achieve security without a monopoly?
Again, community, family, right? Being around people who you are comfortable with and you trust, and having a high trust society, having a high trust environment, and focusing on community. Again, like this outsourcing of security, if you will, to the state has just much like with education and everything else, has undermined community, has undermined our reliance on each other, and dehumanized us, and it's been a huge issue. So, and I think most of us don't have any need for any private security. Most of us, we find just knowing our neighbors, right? I think that's all we really need. Maybe owning a firearm or six, that might help. But I don't think there's any need for private security. I think that's absurd. And most issues like of crime are limited. They're small. There are some civil disturbances and things that can be handled by the family. They can be handled by a community, by your friends. And that's with it better handled, right? It's better handled by people who care about you than some guy with a badge who's just doing it for a paycheck.
Absolutely. I don't think I could have said it better. If you're not tight with your neighbor, that might be something you want to do, or your community, or someone in your community, or at least know someone in your jurisdiction that, hey, has some firearms, can train with them, can help you out. And actually, that will be much more effective, and it'll be a lot quicker than calling 911, as we saw with what happened in Uvalde and other things. Even just calling 911 on the phone, that takes a long time. Even if the operator's nice and everything and they're cooperating, it's still going to take them a long time. So that was really amazing to hear, just all your positions, nailed everything. I'm super excited for what you're doing, because we actually need real change, to me, not cookie cutter stuff, and not people who can't answer questions like, hey, is the ATF terrorist organization? Yes. Should be a quick yes. It shouldn't just be, I think it is. And to me, if we're going to get real change, we actually have to vote on principle. I know a lot of people just say, well, no, I have to just, I hear this all the time. Well, just vote red because it's better.
Why?
Just vote blue. And I hear this stuff like it's almost socialist thinking, like, oh, I earned your vote because I'm a Democrat or Republican, or because Trump or Biden said I'm cool. And to me, that says nothing. So what do you say to people when they're like, well, I don't want to vote because I know I'm going to hear this. I'm going to share your stuff out. I'm going to send it to my conservative and liberal friends. And they're going to say, well, it takes a bunch of money to win an election, all this. Libertarians can't win, even though we know the ideas are better. And I honestly have no problem saying they're objectively better towards the laws of nature and morality and everything. What do you say to people who just say, well, I won't vote for libertarians who can't win? Or the more crass way of saying it, you're just wasting your vote, throwing it away.
Hey, you do you, bro. I mean, that's It's fine by me. I mean, I honestly, like, I think it's silly. I think it's ludicrous to think that, voting for people based on their party affiliation is insane. I think it's just totally disconnected, and it's part of the problem. We're here in 2022. Like, we lived through the whole Corona debacle. We see that the parties are all bullshit. It's all choreographed. It's professional wrestling, but with more mass murder attached. And it's like, if you don't realize that by now, I don't know what to tell you. I don't know what to tell you. Like, if you think that voting for Mastriano or voting for Shapiro is going to give you a better outcome, then fuck, man. Like, wake up. Like, stop drinking the fluoride in your water or something. Like, it's not 2016 anymore, right? It's 2022. Like, this is like where we are. This is where we are. I think that this is we are living through the midst of a collapse of like the greatest empire to ever exist. And if you don't realize that, and you don't take like decisive and radical action now, it's like, well, you're gonna be fucked. And that's really what we all need to accept. We need to be at peace with that, and we need to move forward with that, and just learn to, like, I think the most important thing is we need to learn to love each other, and we need to recognize that it shouldn't be about R versus D or right versus left. Yes, you're cute. We love you. And it's not about white versus black or gay versus straight or any of these things. And all this division is the problem, right? This division is manufactured and it's fake. And we need to stand up and realize that we are one, right? Our interests are ours, and that the state's interests are theirs. And it doesn't matter R or D; they're not our friends. And we all need to kind of stand together in harmony and in love and in peace, and realize that the people who are pushing for wars and the people who are pushing for bloodshed and in hate and division are the baddies, and they need to be rejected. And get over your team affiliations and your weird ego trip about which R or D you have next to your name, and just accept that these people aren't your friends. And let's go on, start our way into the next phase of human existence.
Yeah, you can't break into the next phase of human evolution if your analysis of everything is just vote red or just vote blue, if that's what this results have got you. I know the definition of insanity isn't, doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results, but doing that will drive you crazy. Even furthermore, I definitely like what you said about people all getting together, being as one, because me and you have more in common than any politician. And even I was listening to a veteran, and he said, I was in Iraq, and let me tell you that you people here have more in common with the average Iraqi or the average Afghani than they do anyone in Washington. When we can realize that there's actual real people out here trying to make a change, and a radical change is what we need right now, because the empire is collapsing. It's not like we have tons of time. I talk to people in MC, and even they're like, okay, let's take time. I'm like, God, we don't have tons of time. This isn't 1970 or 1980 where just like, okay, let's sit back on a lawn chair and chill out. I don't think the empire is going to be around for a very long time. So we need people who actually recognize that, which you do. We need people who are actually for real freedom and liberty, people who are for decentralization. And without that, I don't think we're going to be able to improve civilization and society in general. So Matt Hackenburger, thank you very much for your service. Thank you for coming on today. Really appreciate it. Really liked your stance on all the issues. I'm going to share this in the Mises Caucus group on my Twitter. I'm going to be blasting this out until November 8th, and I will be working the polls. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Matt Hackenburger. He is a veteran, and he is the libertarian candidate for governor. Let's actually get your freedom back. Real freedom, not just a cookie cutter version of what people tell you freedom is. And you can go to matthackenburger.com. You can also check him out on all the issues here, donate, and find all of his socials and sign the petition. So, Matt, do you have anything else to say before we cut it out?
No, that's about it. I think we covered everything. So check out my website, matthackenburger.com. Follow me on Twitter at matthackenburg. And let's try to trigger some R's and some D's, and hope we can get some progress.
We'll get you
And
an $8 donation for the blue check mark. Thank you
yeah,
very much, Matt. I really appreciate all your time here. This is Kareem with the Essential Libertarians, giving you the tools for self-governance. Vote on November 8th and vote gold. Let's actually break the system for once.